Hi, Julia. Good morning.
Hi, I was just writing to you. Good morning. Good afternoon to you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Yeah. We will just wait for the other members of the parliament to join us.
Are
And
they coming? Are they coming online or
yeah, online, all online.
everybody?
So
Okay, perfect.
there's no,
Mahid, I just wanted to check how much time do I have?
like you have like 2 hours. But if we can have like more than 1 hour, if you think that it's more Q&A, well, because
Yeah, I want to have Q&A exactly. Okay, so I'll plan to maybe have do it for about an hour or so.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'll stop always in between because there's several chunks to this. So yeah,
No
that's
problem.
fine.
And then I will just facilitate this discussion maybe because usually there is a moderator in the masterclass. And then yeah, I'm not so sure because there are like 12 people who registered, and then I'm not so sure why no one yet come, but we will just wait. It's not yet 4 p.m. here, so yeah.
Okay.
And then maybe after this we can have like a short briefing.
Okay.
Okay,
That's
thank you.
fine.
That's great. Oh yeah, that's great.
No problem. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. No, I think it's good. We'll do that. I'll stop every time before every chapter, and then they can ask questions, and then in the end we can have a discussion, and then we see, how it goes with time. That's fine.
Yes.
Yeah. Shall I then share the screen?
I think maybe we will just wait a while because there's no other participants
Yeah,
yet.
I understand, but shall I be the one sharing the screen, or do you do it from there?
Yeah. Maybe you can share.
I do it. Okay, that's fine. All right.
Now.
Okay, let me just check my camera is working. Yeah, it's fine. All good. All right, fine. I'm here. So whenever. Hi. Good. How many MPs do you expect?
Usually we have like more or less 10 people, and then some parliamentary staffers join also. So more likely more than 10 or below 20, something like that.
Okay.
We should.
All right.
Because we have like weekly master classes. So
okay.
I expect them to join, but unfortunately they have not come yet. Maybe because of, there is a news in the parliament regarding the appointment of the MPs. So maybe that's why.
I don't know. With committees or what?
No, because their term will end like this June, and then the president might appoint new set of yeah, I think the deputy speaker is here.
Hello.
Hi, Julia. Hi, Mahid.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Yes.
Good afternoon, sir. Cotabato City.
Secretary.
Yeah. Good afternoon, sir. How are you, sir?
Okay lang, pasensya na. I was out for about 2 sessions. Yeah.
No problem.
And I was lucky that I was still able to catch up with this master class today.
Yes. And then yeah, we will just wait for the other member of the parliament, and then from there we will can start the discussion in open government.
Yeah,
So,
I have an ongoing meeting right now. I'll be coming back. I'll just put off the video for a while.
Okay.
Join you as soon as possible.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe we can like wait until 8:05 UK time, and then if ever that there are few MPs that join, it's okay. We can proceed, and then we will just wait them.
Okay, that's fine.
We have MP Satar here.
Hello.
Yes, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon po. Yes. Medyo
Yeah.
mahina lang ang ano ko eh. Mahina lang ang net ko. I hope this will getting stronger later.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Mhm. We will just like start the discussion by 4:05, just to wait for the other member of the parliament of the Bangsamoro, and from there we can start the discussion on OGP.
Okay, thank you for the info.
Hi, Julia. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Yeah, thank you for joining the OGP Masterclass of WFD Bangsamoro. And then I think we have enough people so we can formally start the Open Government Partnership Masterclass. So for this afternoon, Honorable Member of the Parliament, we have with us the WFD Senior Transparency Advisor, Julia Kudjin, to present with us the experiences and the practices of open government partnership. And then from there, we expect open discussions and participation from all honorable member of the parliament. Good morning and good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is honorable members of Parliament. It's really a pleasure for me to speak today on the Open Government Partnership. And thanks very much, Mahid, for inviting me to join you this afternoon. So as Mahid said, I'm the Senior Transparency Advisor at the Westminster Foundation. So I work basically in HQ and headquarters, and I provide support to a lot of parliaments and civil society organizations in all of the different countries in which WFD works. So again, very nice meeting you today. Without further ado, I just maybe want to start sort of by introducing what the Open Government Partnership is. So that everybody, maybe some of you are already quite familiar with it, but maybe others not so much. So in order for all of us to be on the same level, I thought maybe doing a quick introduction on what this partnership is. So basically, there's a little video here, which I think Mahid will share the presentation with you, which you can look at some later stage. But the idea really of the Open Government Partnership, it's a multi-stakeholder platform, international. So there's about 78 member countries that are part of it, and about 20, at the moment, 20 local governments that are part of this initiative. And basically the idea of this partnership is to make governments and parliaments more open, accountable, responsive, and transparent to civil society organizations, but mostly to citizens. That's the whole idea of this partnership. And basically what this partnership has, which is a little bit different from other initiatives, if you will, is that basically there's this idea that government and parliaments sit together with civil society organizations to actually decide together what needs to be done with the parliament or the government to become more open and accountable, and what is it that citizens really need the parliament to do. So again, as I said, this initiative was launched exactly 10 years ago now. They just in December celebrated the 10 years of existence of the partnership. And it was originally created by 6 member states and very much pushed by Obama at the time, who was the president of the US 10 years ago. So he was really the one behind this initiative. And other countries such as Indonesia, for example, were also joining the partnership at the time. And then it grew very quickly to, as I said, 78 countries today. And the idea of it is that it's always the president or the prime minister of the country that basically commits the country to join this partnership. And then afterwards, basically within the different ministries or the parliaments, different organs of the state make actually commitments. And I will explain in a second what this basically means. So this idea is basically, as I said, that there's a partnership which is always equal between civil society and the government or the parliament. It's multilateral in the sense that lots of countries, as I said, 78 countries and lots of governments, local governments have joined this partnership. But what makes it really different is that it's always domestically owned. So it's always sort of the country in itself that makes these commitments, and then they bring it together in these international forums of sharing practices. But the idea is always that every country is different, every region of the country is different, and all starting points are very different. And that within this partnership, there's lots of diverse groups that work together within the country, but then also globally, with this idea to always sort of, for a race to the top, basically. And what we've seen is there's a lot of countries. It's not a north or south divide, anything like that. The idea is more, who can make commitments that are really transformative in terms of open government for their country. It's very action oriented because basically, as I said, within this partnership, you have countries that make these commitments towards openness, transparency, and participation. And you have this sort of comprehensive open government approach where all actors within a state should actually contribute to it. And then that's something we will see in just a second, but basically there's a way to also assess these commitments. And one of the things that is very important in the assessment is, again, to see how much has civil society participated in drafting these different commitments and in participating in the partnership.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes. Good afternoon, MP Susana. Thank you. Sorry for that, Julia.
No problem.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hello. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Present.
Hello.
Mobile. Yeah. Good afternoon.
Mahit, can I continue?
Afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon.
You can proceed, Julia.
I can proceed. Okay, perfect. All right, so maybe just to continue. Basically, as I said, the idea of it is that you have this action plan with all of these different commitments that the country, so the government or the parliament actually makes. And the idea is, so within this whole cycle, where so within this whole cycle, basically, there's a consultation phase with civil society. Then there's an implementation and an evaluation, as I said, in the end, with this idea to always bring in different reformers, bringing high-level political support, but have all of society actually engaged in this. And so the Open Government Partnership has developed this whole methodology about how to bring in different actors at every stage within the planning, the implementation, and the evaluation. And so that's something quite important to note. So I want to just move forward a little bit in terms of looking at the impact that this has had. So it has had different sorts of impact. The first one is really around service delivery. And an example I want to bring here comes from South Korea, where basically just a simple fact of publishing online data regarding the quality of the water, so the tap water that people were using or not using, in fact, actually led to a 20% increase in water consumption, in tap water consumption. So you see very clearly that if the government publishes information and is open and transparent about its services, then people consume tap water much more because they actually trust or they see that basically the information is out there, it's transparent, it's public. The same about some open procurement standards. So that's always very, very important to be as open and transparent about public procurement of all sorts of goods and services by the state. And so the publication of open contract data, so of different data standards, of different open data platforms, such as in Ukraine, for example. Unfortunately, now with the war, everything is a little bit in flux, but what they had done is they launched a fantastic public procurement platform, which they evaluate led to about 1.19 billion of saving in procurement over a very short period of time. So really, again, being open and transparent about public procurement can really save money as well, which of course is always very important for a state. The same with, it can help prevent corruption through civic monitoring. So if you bring in civil society organization, it can really help to prevent corruption. In Chile, for example, within the Open Government Partnership, the parliament actually passed a lobbying act, which basically led to the creation of a public registry. So every time MPs or government officials were meeting with different people, they have to register it in a platform, but also a better definition of what lobbying means and doesn't mean. So basically that law clarified that. It also can lead to additional business opportunity. And so, for example, in the US, it's estimated that the revenue annually from firms using government data is valued at $221 billion US. So again, more transparency, more data available, publicly available, can also be very good for business. And then obviously it's being transparent increases the trust of people in government because they really understand much better what government does. And that is particularly important for parliaments as well, where very often people don't really understand what the parliament does or is supposed to do. So now going into one of the main principles of the Open Government Partnership, it's this idea, as I said before, that government and civil society should really work hand in hand in thinking about what these type of commitments could be that favor or that basically pushes transparency and openness of the institutions. So, for example, one of the very good examples was in Georgia, the country, where about 17 of the 19 commitments in the first action plan that the parliament made actually came from civil society. So they had a very good idea about what actually could be the sort of actions that the parliament could take in order to be more open. And so bringing them in actually responded to a clear demand that they had as well on the parliament itself. And the parliament thought that most of these ideas that came from civil society were actually really, really good. And so in 2018-19, the action plan, the consultation had been also expanded to lots of actors in terms of the municipalities. They brought in quite a lot of young people as well, for example. So a lot of things have happened here. Again, this is one of the principles of the Open Government Partnership, is really to have civil society participation when developing the action plan, so the plan with all the commitments in them, but also throughout the cycle, which I showed before. So from the planning to the implementation to the review, the monitoring of what's happening. So very quickly now, what we have seen, the impact of that, because I think that's quite important, is that we have seen that when you look at the spectrum of public participation, maybe let me see if I can expand this. Voila, there we go. It's much clearer, I think. So when you look at the spectrum of public participation, basically you have a goal that starts with informing and goes to empowering. So if you look at the information part, what is that really? It is, you know, the parliament actually, or the government, the parliament informs people about what it's doing. And that's basically true, for example, of static websites. So you put out there information that people will be really interested in looking. The consultation phase is a little bit more. So what you do there is you do online consultation. You try to get feedback from people, from citizens about, you know, some decisions that you're making. the best example here is a public hearing, for example, where you invite people, you inform them about what you're doing, and you consult with them, or an e-learning, an e-platform, for example, for legislation. That would be another of these examples. So that's sort of the second level. The third level is you start involving people in the decision. That's, for example, like you do a workshop where basically whatever it is that they aspire, whatever it is that their concerns are, you take them into the decision. The next phase is around collaboration. So basically you partner with different people within the public, different citizens, for example, and discuss with them what would be the preferred solution here. And that's, for example, I don't know if you've heard in the UK, there's been this climate assemblies, climate citizen assemblies. And what these are is basically that random citizens are selected, and they were selected in the UK randomly to discuss over a couple of weekends with different experts what the UK could do on the path to net zero carbon emission by 2050. And so to arrive there, they made a couple of recommendations. And this is really how you bring in people to collaborate. And then the empowering part is where basically there are some decisions that you put in the hands of the public. And so what we see in the spectrum of public participation, and that's why it's really, really important, is that in the beginning, in a lot of the OGP action plans, you see that what the government was aiming or was going for or the parliaments was really about informing people. It was access to information, giving people the information. But what we see after 10 years is that for a lot of these different commitments that are made, there's more and more a sort of level of collaboration to empowerment that there wasn't there before. So there's definitely, as the relationship with civil society is being created, they bring in the public, and we see much more that the decisions are less about informing and much more about involving and collaborating, not necessarily about empowering, because not everything can be in the hands of the public either. So who should participate in the Open Government Partnership? Well, first of all, well, as I said before, the governments or the parliaments, and some representatives there. What we have seen is that when there's very high level political support, for example, from a president or prime minister or speaker or deputy speaker of parliament, there's a commitment to what is in the action plan, so to the commitments that are actually being made. So that's quite important. There is for every country, and the Philippines as a country is part of this initiative, but there is this one person within the government that is called the point of contact that is responsible for coordinating all of this. And then within the ministries, there's always different capacities and operational capability that are needed. On the CSO side, what's really important here to say, and that's a responsibility by the civil society organizations, I will come to that in a second, is that there needs to be also a fair and transparent mechanism of representation. So not every CSO that works in the Bangsamoro or works in Philippines can actually participate because you can't have 250 CSOs participating. But what they need to put in place is a mechanism where some civil society organizations actually represent the other ones, and then they come back to them regularly to check in and let them know what has been going on. And so there's also all sorts of different actors. Again, it depends a little bit on the countries, but and the local context, but there is usually some business association, private sector organizations that are part of this as well. And external facilitators like WFD has done in quite a few countries. So just to say, every country, and that's at country level, has a multi-stakeholder forum, just for you to be informed of that. And that is basically an organ of coordination of this partnership, where you have civil society organizations and government or parliament that are part of this initiative. And the idea is really to start thinking and regularly see how the commitments are being implemented and think a little bit about what could be some of the next commitments, because every time, every action plan is actually for 2 years. So every 2 years, there's new commitments being made. I'm briefly maybe going to stop here and see if there's any questions before we go into the concrete topic around the parliament itself. Is there any questions? No, I don't see any questions. Okay, then I'll continue. No questions. No. Ah, yeah, there's a question. Mr. Ali?
Yeah. Hello, Julia.
Hello, nice
Yeah.
to meet you.
Nice to meet you. You were mentioning about the government open procurement. Okay. And we agree with you that it helps. Government open procurement helps in preventing corruption, improve delivery of service. But if I heard you right, you said that the president or the prime minister or the head of the government plays a very important role in this program or in this activity of government open procurement. Why you say this? Because it is necessary for the president or the head of the state to really propose for this program, or activate this program.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I will clarify that.
Yeah, and your experience in
Yeah.
in the
Okay.
other country.
Thank you so much for your question. So basically on the public procurement itself, just to clarify that every country decides what it is that it wants to do. And I will come to that in a second. There's a couple of, there's a template basically, which gives general guidelines about what could be done. So one of the pillars, for example, of different commitments is around access to information. It's very large, so different countries have different needs or different things they want to do when it comes to access to information. So there's not like something under the OGP that says you need to do public procurement. It's not necessary. There could be other things that, in Bangsamoro at the moment are more important to work on than public procurement, for example. So it's not like it was just an example to say, to show you that some countries have made some commitments around public procurement, and that has saved them a lot of money. But it doesn't mean to say that you necessarily need to do a commitment that is linked to public procurement. So that's the first part that I just wanted to clarify. The second part to this is that, yes, so there needs to be some kind of commitment at high level political, at high political level. So if it's not the president of a country, then it can be a For example, what we've seen is in Georgia, it's the Minister of Justice that basically holds the portfolio of the Open Government Partnership. So again, it depends a little bit from country to country, and that will change. And at local level, and I will come to that at the very end of my presentation, because a lot of what I said now, it's more at country level for the Philippines more generally. And so you will understand a little bit more the intricacies for a subnational level, which you are in. But at subnational level as well, there needs to be some kind of commitment of someone that basically manages the local authorities. So again, it will depend of the configuration of the region or the city, because there's some cities like Madrid, for example, that are part of this partnership as well. So in a city, it will be the mayor that leads the partnership. In a region, it will be, you know, the head of the government of that specific region. Like, for example, in Scotland as a region is part of the partnership. And there it's the head of the Scottish devolved government that is part of the partnership. So again, as I said, it can vary a little bit from country, from region. So there's not like a prescribed, there's nothing really, I mean, OGP tries to be as flexible as possible. So there's no prescribed, you know, person per se. It doesn't say a government needs to be represented by a president or a prime minister. It can vary, but it needs to be someone that represents the government, the local government, the city, for example. So that's the criteria. And for the parliaments, and we will come to that, you know, it has to be either the speaker or the deputy speaker. You can't just have a staff, for example, of the parliament, which will say, we want to be part of OGP, but then it's never been discussed, and they submit some kind of commitments, but then it's never been discussed with the parliament itself. They can't commit the parliament to something that, you know, that it's logical, basically. You can't commit the parliament to an international partnership if it's not done at political level.
Ma'am Julia, in the case of the Bangsamoro government, our chief minister is advocating, promoting moral governance as an agendum of government, and I see the GOP as a mechanism in the Bangsamoro to realize or to strengthen that agendum on moral governance. That's why I was asking you about it, because in the case of the Bangsamoro government, our chief minister himself is advocating for moral governance, and I think GOP is a mechanism, no, to strengthen that advocacy of the government of the day. My second question, Ma'am Julia, is what's the mechanism of CSO's participation in your experience on the GOP?
Yeah, so I mean, do you mean in terms of identifying the CSOs, or do you mean how they participate?
Just the mechanism of participation.
Okay, so I mean, basically, what is really important in my experience, and that's something that I always do, that's why it's important sometimes, it depends again on the context, but to have a facilitated session with civil society is always important. Why? Because in many contexts, and I'm not saying this is the case in Bangsamoro, I'm just saying this is something that I have seen in lots and lots of countries and regions of the world. Civil society have this tendency very often to attack the government, attack the parliament, because that's what they know to do. That's what they've done, you know, for decades, and that has been their role. And so what's really important here is to explain that we're not in a situation. Being part of the Open Government Partnership means this word partnership. And partnership means you cannot start attacking systematically the government or the parliament of the day. You need to start working together. And that's why it's important that these commitments are crafted together and implemented together as partners. And so I always, usually when I work with civil society organizations, I start by having these discussions with them to say, this is not a forum. If you want to attack the government or the parliament in the media, that's fine to do that on, on some other topics. But within the Open Government Partnership, this needs to be about a partnership. So you need to work together. And so I think about the first step is about, I think, changing a lot of the initial sort of thinking or the initial actions that the civil society will make. And just as I said, just saying, we're not fighting here, we are working together. And that basically means that we bring them around the table, first of all, to explain to them that, this is a partnership and that's how you should work. And then I've done different things in different countries. Again, it depends very much on the context. In some contexts and some countries or regions, there is already a very good established relationship between civil society organizations and the parliaments or the governments. So they already meet regularly, they discuss different issues. And so one can use that forum basically and bring everybody together and think a little bit about what those kind of commitments could be. But in the majority of places, this relationship doesn't exist in that form. As I said, they might meet or be invited for a hearing or something like that, but they don't regularly meet. There's no forum where they come together. And so what we've done in quite a few places is, first of all, create this space for collaboration, for coming together. And it's gone as far in some parliaments, but again, it's not the majority. But in some parliaments, what they've done is because one of the issues of the Open Government Partnership, and I will come to that when you speak about the parliament, is, or even the government, there's not necessarily a space to host it. There's not, in every parliament, there's not a space where you will host, there's not a committee, like an education committee where you host issues of education, for example. There's no openness and transparency committee or anything like that that exists. In some parliaments, you have a bureau, which is, basically the speaker has a specific bureau next to him or her. And basically those are MPs that are, from all political factions that meet regularly. And that could be a forum to host it. But it doesn't exist in every parliament. And so in Georgia, for example, they changed the rules of procedure to create this working group where they regularly meet with civil society. They meet about once a month. It's called the Transparency Council. And so they meet there to create this permanent mechanism of collaboration with civil society. But again, this is, a bit far down the line. It's not, it's not something that you have to create or you have to do. I think what a first plan really seeks to do is bring civil society around the table, identify who the actors are, and start a discussion regular discussions between civil society and the parliament, and start building this relationship.
Thank you, Ma'am Julia, for the clarification.
Thank you.
Very brief question.
Yes.
Yeah, my question is: we're still in the process. We are still in the transition period. on institutional building. Is it important that we now implement open governance, open partnership, considering that the influence of the CSO might, cause confusion right now on what we want to achieve during the transition period?
Yes, so I will get back to it in a second because I will explain to you what it actually takes for Bangsamoro to be part of the partnership. And given the current time frame for applying, which is mid-March, I think that my opinion on this would be that a formal participation in the Open Government Partnership will be very difficult to achieve within this very short time frame now, 2 weeks or so. But that being said, I think it's important for you to understand what this partnership is, because I do think that maybe in the next call, so in 1 year, it would be good to officially apply for it. So I think there's a lot of things that the Parliament can already do now, which basically opens up this door to become formally part of the partnership. And what I mean under this, I will explain a little bit sort of more the methodology, and maybe that will be a bit clearer. But I think there are a lot of actions, as I said, in terms of starting to identify who those CSOs are that want to work with the Parliament. And I've done some work in the Bangsamoro already with, and WFD has, part of its program does work with civil society. I think we have a group of 12 civil society now, organizations that are very keen to work with you. And so that's what we're doing as well on our side is, again, trying to sort of explain to them that there is a different role for civil society to play as well, which is more a role supporting you in the work that you're doing rather than criticizing you. So we're working also with them to try to see how maybe they can support. So I think opening up the door for more partnership, more collaboration, for eventually being able to formally join in a year, I think could be a good step forward. But I will get to that in just I think probably 20 minutes or so. There's still, I think there were some.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you.
I think there were maybe some questions in the chat. I'm trying to see where, because I have the.
I can read a question or from.
Yeah, it's fine. I have it. Okay, great. So there was a question around public procurement. Yeah, so the idea basically was that by basically opening up public procurement, so instead of procuring directly, you open up public procurement. And in the case that I was explaining, it's in Ukraine. They have this website. I can just quickly find it for you. I'll put it in the chat in just a second, called Prozoro. And on there, you basically have everything that the state is procuring. And by making that transparent and public, basically, there's a lot more companies that applied for it. And through that, you're actually, you don't have just one competitor. It drives up competition for what the state is procuring. And so you get more people basically tendering for what you're bringing out in terms of the procurement. And that actually saves money to the government. It reduces corruption in the sense that you don't have a one-to-one, so it's not authorized anymore under a certain threshold. You can't just procure. So basically, I don't know, if the Parliament wants to wants to give every MP, for example, a phone, it's just an example, what they're going to do is they're going to procure that. So there's going to be different companies that will apply for it. And so you're going to bring the price for the phone down because, you know, there's competition basically. And you're going to reduce corruption because everybody sees that, you know, there are these phones and that the parliament is trying to procure for the MPs, for example. And basically it reduces, you know, corruption in the sense that you might have, you know, a little bit of, there could be a contract where basically there is corruption for that specific company to get the phones or to get the contract, they will pay this or this person. So this is just what I wanted to say on this. I don't know. I hope this is clarified. Maybe I'll continue at this stage, and then we'll open it up just in about 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes. Just once I've explained on the parliament. Let me go back maybe to full screen. There we go. Okay, so on the parliamentary openness. So what have a lot of the parliaments done today? So what you have to know is that in the beginning, when the partnership was launched in 2011, basically they did not foresee that parliaments would be part of this initiative. So it was something, that's why it's called open government. And now what we've said is that government means, it doesn't just mean the government, the executive, but the government means all branches of the government, including the local governments and parliaments. So little by little, this started to open up to parliament. And the reason why is that a lot of the governments were making specific commitments around changing legislation. And you know very well that changes legislation means that the parliament needs to be involved. So very, very quickly, the Open Government Partnership realized that they couldn't really keep the parliaments out of the partnership because parliaments were going to be key in implementing some of the reforms and some of the commitments that the governments were making. So as I said, you know, what have parliaments done around the world until now? First of all, reviewing legislation. Again, it's something that the governments commit to within their plans, but you know, they don't necessarily think that when they commit, there needs to be a parliament behind that actually, you know, supports this and passes the legislation, discusses and passes the legislation. So that's, of course, the first and most obvious thing that parliaments have done. In quite a few countries, there's been great political support for open government, more generally, for more transparency, more openness. And what that means is that a lot of political parties have been involved as well within the partnership. And that has been done through the work within the parliaments themselves. And that's really good because it basically means that when one government falls or when it changes, the reforms can just be picked up by the next government. So it's always good to have large political support for this because it means sustainability over time. And it means basically working across party lines and within the and outside also of electoral cycles. So it's not so much linked to a particular election or government of the day. Parliaments have also done a lot by holding government to account. So some of the governments have made particular commitments related to transparency and openness, and some parliaments have basically questioned them around what they have done. And that's been very important, for example, again, in countries like Georgia or Kyrgyzstan. And basically, where it's been possible, some countries have actually said that they wanted to really look at government at large, so all branches of government. So what we have seen is some kind of bigger state commitment, if you wish. So bigger commitments that are basically of all branches of government, and some of the parliaments have really triggered that. So in order to have a plan, so if the parliament says, I want to be an institution under this open state, if you wish, I want to be an institution that makes these commitments, what does it take? I think there's about 10 steps or so, which I've identified. The first one is around building political will. As I said again, it's the speaker or the deputy speaker that really leads this reform. But there needs to be political will also across party lines. And see then what is the kind of process which is appropriate for your parliament. Is it to have an own plan of your own? And you can do that very easily. Is it to not have your own plan, but look at what the government is doing and decides and look within that, what is the kind of legislation that needs to be passed? What are the types of commitments that the government has identified? And under this, you actually hold the government to account. I mean, just determining what it is that the parliament wants to do in terms of being part of this partnership. Then identifying, as I said before already, what is the type of parliamentary body that can lead this process? Do you need to create a working group, formal or informal, like the Georgians have done a formal one, but that's really not necessary? Is there a specific body within the parliament that can lead these reforms, that is in charge of openness and transparency? Where do you put it within the parliament, this reform agenda? Who's the focal point within your institution? Is it a parliamentarian? Is it a staffer? Who takes this forward and works concretely on what it is that can be done? And then the next step is, what is the process by which civil society participation will take place? Do you already have currently civil society organizations that you work with that you could, contact, and their role then is to invite others? Do you want to maybe do it through, the WFD civil society network that we have started to create? What are the mechanisms, what the different ways that you want to involve civil society? Again, there's lots of different ways to do it, and it's just a matter of identifying how you want to lead this process forward. Then create some kind of process with civil society. So either what I've seen in a couple of places is that civil society thinks about the types of commitment they think the parliament could be taking, and then brings them to the parliament, and then they have a discussion about, what the proposals are. In other places, this is being crafted together. So parliament and civil society sits together and thinks through what it is that could be done in terms of what the types of commitments are. Then there's the co-creation, so they work together on a concrete action plan, and I will show you in a second what that looks like. And then they implement the plan, and then you monitor and you repeat the cycle. So what are, this partnership also comes with some kind of roles and responsibility. And the one responsibility, the main one for the parliament is, you basically have the responsibility to make sure that there's this co-creation, which I talked about with civil society. And the rest is just record keeping and some coordination with the government. The civil society, I think, has a much bigger responsibility, and that is to always provide constructive feedback. So again, not to create this antagonistic relationship, but provide constructive feedback on the process. And the second responsibility, which is quite important as well, is they need to make sure that they reach out to other civil society actors. So broad interests are represented. So you don't have just the 5 same CSOs that are part of this process, but that you enlarge it to other CSOs that maybe in the beginning, weren't part of this process, but, that have an interest to participate and work with the parliament. So when we now look at the different pillars, I explained before that, there is a couple of things that you find within every action plan, a couple of commitments which you always find. And for the parliament, these are quite specific. So one thing which I talked about quite a bit already is holding the executive to account for what they're doing. Again, it's not something mandatory, but a lot of parliaments have actually done it. Then there's things around opening up public access, so access to information about the work of the parliament. And that's again where I want to come back to this question that was asked about, do we need to do that immediately? You don't necessarily need to be immediately part of the partnership, but I think taking some steps towards improving public access to information is not necessarily something which you need to do within the partnership itself, but I think it is a good practice that we see in a lot of parliaments around the world, is that if you want to improve trust of people in the parliament, if you as MP want to make sure that people understand what your role is as a member of parliament, because most of the times people don't know what the parliament is actually doing. But if you want to create this culture of democracy, this culture of people understanding what it is that you guys are doing and how you're representing people, which facilitates the election process as well for you, because when the next election comes, I know it's been postponed, but when it comes, people will understand that they are voting for a member of parliament, and they will understand what the parliament does. And I think within that process and taking that path, it's important to actually improve public access to information. And so people understand, that a parliament legislates, it oversees, it actually is responsible for the use of public funds, for example. I think those are important things that people need to understand and know. And communication is really important and key in that. And I have worked together with someone from an organization called My Society, and looking at the technical capacity of the Bangsamoro Parliament, specifically on what is the type of information that is publicly accessible. And I think that there are probably some steps that can be taken in that regard. Now, the interesting part, I think, of bringing civil society to the table is there are probably a lot of things that you consider as being necessary in terms of public access to information. But what civil society might be able to tell you is, where should you prioritize? What are the things that they really need in order to inform citizens, and they can play that bridging role, informing citizens about what the parliament does. You can't do all reforms within one day. So civil society can help you to prioritize some of these reforms. So that's on the public access to information. The second one is around starting to establish a culture, if you will. It's a long-term endeavor, but a culture of more public engagement. So how do you bring in people into the decisions? Because people want to participate. They don't always know how to participate, but generally people are keen to participate, especially if the decisions that you are taking are decisions that affect their lives. So when it's, things specifically around, for example, pension, old people will be interested to know what's happening around pension. So bringing them into the decision is a good way for you to ensure that they understand what the parliament is actually doing, and they feel heard. They feel like they have a say within the actions that are taken by public institutions. And then the third one, and that's where civil society is always very keen, is to create this different mechanism for public oversight of what the legislature is doing. And I will give examples of what's been done around different countries around the world, different regions. So again, just to say, those are examples. They're not mandatory. So it doesn't mean to say that every parliament needs to have all these different things. It just means to say that there's different pillars and different things that the parliament can do. So around access to information, what we've seen a lot in quite a few parliaments is more information about management and management, data management systems. Open data very often establishes some kind of open data around who the MPs are, who the staffers are within the parliament that you can reach, different laws that are coming to the parliament, and what are the types of comments that are being introduced by MPs, but also external institutions, for example. So all of that is publicly online. Committee reports, agendas, parliamentary questions. There's often restructuring of websites, for example, as well. These are the type of access to information that we see. In terms of the engagement, the participation angle, we see opening up, for example, of websites where people can participate in legislation or budget processes. Again, there it's really important to give some kind of feedbacks, because once people participate, they also want to hear and know what's happened with the type of information they introduced in the system. Some kind of online application for public participation in parliamentary performance, for example, citizen survey, youth parliament, lots of different things. There's also something quite important. In a lot of the parliaments, the access to the building is very difficult. And that is, of course, to do with security concerns. I mean, the UK is very well placed to know that, some MPs have been attacked and have died. So it's important to ensure security of the parliamentary building. But at the same time, it's also important to let citizens, the parliament is the house of the people. So it's at the same time also important to let people access the building. So that might mean access the building, that there needs to be high-level security screening, which you have in the House of Commons. So in the House of Commons, everybody can access the parliamentary building. So you don't even need to register in advance. But there is high-level security. So you're checked worse than probably if you go on a plane. You're being checked while in the parliament, in the House of Commons. In order to enter the building, you're being security screened, but everybody has access to the building itself. But what's important here, it's not to necessarily do that, but just very often what we find is that the procedures for accessing hearings, for example, are very, very cumbersome. So there's like several people that needs to approve for, if a CSO wants to participate in a parliamentary hearing, it's very complicated because, you need to put a paper form in, it needs to go through several people, screening, etc. And sometimes just simplifying the procedure by making it online, for example, can really help a lot in that. And that can be one of the commitments that the parliament makes, is to simplify this procedure. So finally, on the public accountability, there's a lot of things there that we've seen, but it's often about, it can be about institutionalizing this relationship between CSOs and the parliament in the framework of OGP, but elaborating a code of ethics for members of parliament, lobbying legislation, I talked about that before already in Chile, public procurement, monitoring of MPs' expenditures. We've seen that in some countries as well. So just to say, since just now, December, we have a new policy for parliaments to be part of the partnership. Before, they needed to follow whatever the government was doing. So if the government had made those commitments for 2 years, every 2 years, and they had to follow the same cycle. Whereas now there was a decision that was made, because the electoral cycle very often is different, not in all countries always, but you might have a parliamentary election that is different from a presidential election, for example. And so because of that, there was a decision that was made that the parliaments are able to delink from the National Action Plan. I will explain in a second what that means for local government, because there it's still very much linked to the government, but generally parliaments are more free now to decide on their own planning, on their own timing. I will just go briefly into the OGP local, just because I think it will apply very much to you, and then I will open up again for some questions. So OGP has decided that apart from the governments themselves, from the national governments, it also had this ability to open up this methodology of civil society and government, parliament, to local actors. So that means, as I said, cities or devolved parts, regions, different regions. Again, it takes different shapes and forms depending on the country themselves. But what you need to do in order to be eligible is you have to apply for this separately from the national. So Philippines is part of OGP, but this would be almost like a separate process. And for that, at the moment, but there's no clear decision that has been made. Maybe in a year, when you're thinking about applying, it's different. But at the moment, there still needs to be some kind of political leader from the government side. So the Bangsamoro government would need to apply to be part of OGP together with civil society organizations. You need 18 months left, just so that there's enough time to implement some of the reforms. There needs to be a track record of some kind of open government or co-creation with civil society, and that's why it is important that you start taking the steps already now, potentially to be able to apply in the future. There needs to be some kind of ambition for what it is in terms of open government, open parliament action that Bangsamoro wants to take for the future. And again, there needs to be something put in place in terms of the co-creation with non-governmental organizations. So again, it is very good to start putting these things in place already now. So at the moment, there's a call that's actually open. I put the online form there so you can look what's required. But there's been a call that's been open from where the deadline is sometime mid-March. And they're going to do a selection with some kind of diversity to make sure that different regions, configurations, different regions of the world are being represented. And within that, again, those are in the expression of interest, the criteria, as I explained before, what they are. And there needs to be some kind of letter of support of at least one CSO and the head of the government. It could be also the sort of the head of the government and the speaker, deputy speaker of the parliament of the Bangsamoro. So again, in terms of the rules, it is much more flexible than at national level. So the rules is really that it spans along the length of the administration. It doesn't need to be 2 years or 4. It can be 4 years, for example. It can be 3 years, but it needs to be 18 months. You make about 5 commitments at the time, and more commitment you can do whenever one commitment is implemented, for example. It's very simple to submit an action plan. So in terms of the national governments, it's much more complicated. They've really tried to simplify it a lot.
Amulya,
And
excuse me,
this is my
Amulya,
last, yeah, this is my last slide. And then I'll
slide
just come
moving.
back to it.
Your slide is not moving. Your slide is not moving.
It's not moving? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you see this? Do you see
Just
how
now,
does it
Mamulia.
work?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
just now.
Just now,
Yeah, thank you.
okay. I don't know why it didn't move. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Maybe I leave it like this so that I'm sure you can see it. So basically, there's this new rules, as I said, where the timing is a little bit different. The number of commitments are 5, but it's very easy to submit an action plan. It's not very complicated at all. Everything is done online. And basically, there's this online regular assessment as well, where you say where you are and where you want to go. And there's this whole mechanism in place with, with learning. So there's this whole learning and peer exchange that has been put in place. And I've already been in touch actually with both the devolved Scottish Assembly as well as the Catalan. And, and both of these devolved assemblies actually said, well, we would be happy to talk to the Bangsamoro to try to see, if there's anything that we can do to help, and especially share the experience that we have working under OGP. So again, there's this mechanism of wanting to share and learn under the Open Government Partnership, which I think could be something quite interesting. So I'm going to stop here and maybe take again some questions.
Yeah, Mamulya.
Yes.
This is AD. I just would like to clarify, Mamulya, if the GOP can be done by a ministry. It can be started by a ministry. Let's say one ministry would like to implement a program on GOP. Can it be done in your experience in your country?
Yes, so it can be done as long as that ministry represents the government. So basically, as I said, for example, what we've seen is a ministry, like the Ministry of Justice of one country represents the whole government, basically. So it is one ministry, but it can also coordinate. So if the Ministry of Justice, for example, is the one that coordinates, and tomorrow you have another ministry that says, oh, I want to also join OGP, that it's very clear that it is the Ministry of Justice that is the one that is actually implementing, right? Because otherwise you have lots of different ministries, they all want to be part of it. It needs to be coordinated somewhere. So it's possible, as long as it's clear that this is the ministry that is coordinating everybody. So whenever other ministries want to join, and if there's other ministries that want to make some commitments, that it is that ministry that represents everybody and coordinates. So I think that's yes, we've seen it. So again, it's not necessarily that it's only the prime minister of a country that represents the overall country. You have also different ministries. So as I said, as long as it's clear that it is that ministry that represents everybody, I think it's fine, yes.
Okay, thank you. Just a little of this. You just mentioned this, I think, about the code of ethics, you
Yeah.
mentioned, yeah. I just would like to find out from Julia if the code of ethics you were mentioning is codified. Is it a code in your experience of the parliament, the code of ethics of parliament, something like that?
Yes, so many parliaments have a code of ethics. So basically, you know, it is about sort of ethics of the members of parliament. And again, that will vary a lot from context to context. In some countries, for example, parliamentarians need to only be parliamentarians. They cannot have a business on the side, or they have very clear rules as to what they can do on the side, right? So they can only be professor of a university, or they can, you know, it's kind of very clear what an MP can do. In other places, it is no problem. In other places, you have MPs that are also businessmen, for example. But then what you often have is a code of ethics that says, you know, if the parliament needs to take a decision that directly impacts, you know, that MP's company, for example, then the MP is out of the vote, or there's specific procedures around this, for example. Then a code of ethics also regulates, you know, what kind of gifts can an MP accept. So again, and that varies a lot from country to country. In some parliaments, it's very clear that an MP can never accept any gift that is of a value more than $20, for example. So basically, they cannot go be invited for dinner by anybody. They have to pay for their own. In other parliaments, this is absolutely no problem. You can be invited by different people, and you know. So basically, what a code of ethics does is it clarifies all of these things and puts a procedure to it. So another thing is around asset declaration. So a lot of the parliaments actually say that every MP needs to declare the assets. So they need to declare what they have, because then it's much clearer that if they start being an MP and they have this much, and then they end their term and they have this much more, and that doesn't at all correspond to, you know, whatever an MP is being paid, then, you know, questions can be asked. So again, it's not something that you see in every parliament, but it's definitely something that you see more and more. So again, a code of ethics is a way to kind of see what are the ethics within that the MPs need to respect. You put some clear rules, and then you put also a procedure. You link it to a procedure. So you say, you know, if an MP hasn't complied to these specific rules, what is the type of procedure that is put in place? Because, you know, it's not like someone else can actually start. It's not like you can ask an external person to start looking into that. You need to have within the parliament itself, given the immunity of members of parliament, you need to have within the parliament a procedure that treats all of these different cases and the abuses that you could have. So that's what it is. It's almost like a disciplinary measures that are put in place, and that first of all help interpret what the rules of the game are. And so under the OGP, you have seen, you know, in a couple of parliaments, a request by civil society and by the parliament themselves to clarify the rules of engagement for the MPs. Again, it's not something, it's not something you have to do under OGP. I just want to clarify that. It's not like, you know, that is something you have to do. It's just something that some of the parliaments have decided to work on.
yeah, Ma'am Julia, we are our parliament is in the process. No, we have already the draft of the code of ethics of the parliament. But in your experience, is it a code is it codified? Is it a law? The code of ethics, is it a law in the parliament or simply a resolution?
It's often a resolution. It's a resolution because it applies to the MPs themselves, right? It's not something external necessarily. So most of most of the parliaments have it as a resolution, but what it's often is that within the rules of procedure of the parliament, there are some of the aspects of a specific codes of ethics that you can find within the rules of procedure. And the rules of procedure are law, of course, right? So it's a bit of both in a way. Some of the principles you find in the rules of procedure, you can find in the rules of procedure, and then you clarify it more. Basically, you go a bit more in detail within a resolution, for example.
Okay, thank you, Ma'am Julia, for the clarification.
Thank you.
Many thanks.
Thanks. I think there's another question.
Yes.
Yes.
Julia.
Yes. Hello.
Yeah, this is MP Ampatuan.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Just to put the context of what we are doing right now, as far as the Bangsamoro government, we all know that we are now in transition. However, there are national laws that governs us, and also we can formulate our own laws. Right now, at the national level, there are sets of there is an existing executive order about the open government, but it's just an executive order. It didn't apply to become a law because of perhaps some resistance. I don't know if it's with the government agencies themselves, but the way I look at it, it can be done in the Bangsamoro. But talking about open government, it is actually a very broad idea of putting all together a system or this mechanism in legislation. I just want to zero in on what can be done as a parliament, given that there are other existing laws on open data, existing policies on open data, opening of website, participation in budget, online publication. But as a new parliament, what do you suggest to us? Because when we put the OGP, Open Government Partnership, the word partnership, and your lecture talks about partnership with the civil society, I am thinking of how we can maximize the civil society's participation in the parliament legislations or works, but without expecting any assistance coming from the parliament. When we say partnership, it is supposed to be a collaboration, meaning to say they have their own resources and we have our own resources, and we will put it all together to have the partnership. The problem right now is there are so many expectations. Pardon me for those who are not into it, but once you engage with civil society, they're expecting resources coming from the government, and in this case, maybe with the parliament. So what do you suggest to us so that we can have the partnership, but them not expecting resources coming from us? That's a question.
Yes, so thanks very much for this very good question. I think on sort of what could be done, the first part of your question, as I said, I think, you know, there's a lot of things that I can see could be done. But, you know, again, who am I to say what exactly needs to be done? I think really it would be good to bring in civil society and to ask them, what should we do? What do you need in terms of access to information? What is it you want to know from us? Do you want to know what we're discussing within the committees? Do you want to know, you know, what is it that you need to know? And so what we as WFD have started to do is help them to identify what are currently the sources. So we have developed we've supported the development of what we call a playbook. And that is basically we've given them all the sources that are currently available, so they wouldn't come back to you and say, we need this and that, and you already have it, you're already doing it. So we've looked into what are the best ways for civil society to get all the information they need from the parliament. And so within that, they will already know what it is, but they will be missing, I think, there will be missing some things. I mean, just to give you an example, I know I'm going to go into that next week, and I don't know if you will be participating in that, but basically I will be explaining a little bit in terms of the digital readiness of the parliament. There's one thing that is not standardized across the board within the Bangsamoro Parliament, and that is email addresses. So all MPs use lots of different email addresses, and so that can create a lot of confusion for people, for CSOs that need to access or want to write to a member of parliament to let them know, you know, about an issue they're particularly concerned about, for example. In many cases, you don't find the email addresses of the member of parliament. If you do, then it might be a Gmail address, it might be a Yahoo, or it might be the formal parliament email. So what would be useful, for example, is to establish, it's only an example, right? I'm not saying you need to do this. I just want to say it is an example. What you could do is always have the formal parliament address being used, and then that being forwarded to Yahoo or Gmail addresses. But there's one platform basically that people, or one email address that people can use. So if they know your first name and then it's just your surname, they can find you very easy and write to you. That's only one of the examples here, but you know, it could be something that civil society says, well, that would be something that would really facilitate the communication with member of parliament. What we've seen as well is that the parliament has lots of different Facebook pages, lots of different channels of communication, and things don't necessarily go through the main website of the parliament. And so that's maybe another thing to address, to kind of see that, you know, you simplify things and they become easier so that people can find what it is that they're looking for and that the parliament communicates in a transparent manner. That's only on the access to information. And again, I don't want to impose anything or say this is what you necessarily should be doing. But what I would just do is listen to civil society to see what it is that they think would be useful for you to communicate on and how you could be doing it. So that was one of the things that was the first part of your question, and I didn't write down the second part, so I apologize. Mahi, did you write down the?
Yeah, the question is that how the parliament can engage the CSO without in a way that
financial means. Yeah, sorry, I forgot about that. So I think again, it is about communication and being clear about what it is that you're trying to achieve. And WFD is not, so the CSOs that we're working with, the 12 right now, we're not funding them. We're providing capacity building, and we're providing them support, training in a way, but we're not providing them with any financial means. And yet they are participating very actively. And we made it very clear from the beginning that we were not going to provide them with financial support, but we were going to provide them with useful information that could help them in doing their work better. And so I think as long as it is clear that once they enter the partnership, there is no money attached to it, basically. It is about helping them to make their work easier and better. I think in my experience, this hasn't been necessarily an issue. It has been an issue for some civil society organizations that do not have any funding, but I think OGP that's not something it will address. I mean, you have to be very clear that this is not the source of, it doesn't come necessarily with money. There is a trust fund that was established under OGP, and there are possibilities for funding some of this work, but it is not necessarily through funding specific CSOs, to be very clear.
Yeah, Julia, just on the trust fund, can you elaborate on that? It's interesting for us to know that.
On the what?
On the trust fund.
On the trust fund. Yeah, so they have, so OGP has established a trust fund, and there's been some funding actually that has been going towards different, at country level, different things. So there's different streams. One stream has been about research and more global or more local, but one stream has been about some kind of funding that has gone mainly to civil society actors or coalitions that have come together to work on implementing some specific commitments. That you have seen, and that's OGP. But then what we've seen as well is some donors that have bilaterally supported some governments in different countries in the implementation of specific commitments. So, for example, there's been, again, I will give Georgia because that's an easy example, but basically the United Nations Development Program has gone in to, once the commitments have been laid down and, the parliament has said, we want to do this, this, and that, UNDP has come in and funded the implementation of some of these activities. But again, it depends from country to country, from different contexts. So there's both the OGP Trust Fund on the one side, but it's been geared more towards civil society, I would say, and they're not funding one CSO, they're actually funding coalitions of CSOs with very clear objective of what they want to achieve or why they need this money. So it's not about just giving a CSO money. And then, as I said, there's the bilateral donors that have also been funding a lot of these different activities in different countries. But I wouldn't know the specific Bangsamoro context. But I know, for example, for the parliament, there is a big EU program. So maybe, if there are some really good ideas within the action plan with different commitments that actually fit some of the objectives of the program that they are putting in place or implementing, then there could be some funding there. Yeah.
Yeah, one last question, Julia, if I may.
Yes, of course.
On open communication, what we are doing right now in the parliament is we do live coverage using the Facebook on our sessions, but On other meetings, for example, committee meetings, technical working group meetings, public hearings, it is not live. Perhaps there are some internal rules within us that do not allow it. Would you recommend that all the proceedings of the parliament be open to the public? For example, committee meetings, technical working group meetings, public hearings. In other governments or in other parliaments, do they openly share the proceedings, the minutes of the meetings of both the plenary and the committees, the proceedings? Do they do that as part of the open government and open communication?
It really depends, because you have some context where the rules of the constitution itself, like Morocco is a country where the constitution itself does not allow committee meetings to be open to the public. So, unless you change the constitution, there's nothing the parliament can do. There are some exceptions under that. And so we've been working, for example, to bring committee meetings outside of the building of the parliament, because that allows for more openness. But there are some, or there's also an exception if the head of the committee, for example, gives a specific exception. Under COVID, there's been a lot of these exceptions that have been given because it was established that the interest of the public was so high for some of the committee meetings around COVID-19 measures that it was a specific or special exception that was given. But that is a very specific context. Many of the parliaments, more and more, I would say plenaries are usually, in the majority of parliaments, plenaries are open to the public, often broadcasted, and open also for physical participation of citizens and civil society, obviously with a limit, right? I mean, you don't have 1,000 places, so there has to be a limit. So usually there's a procedure where people can subscribe, but basically there is no discrimination in terms of it's open to many people. So plenaries, I would say, generally are open. Committee meetings, again, it depends very much. What you have is sometimes completely closed. Sometimes these rules where it's open unless you have something very specific to discuss that is, more internal to the parliament and not of concern to people, because you have those issues too, right? But the reality is that if a civil society organization wants to influence a bill that comes into the parliament or has some kind of recommendations to make the bill better, it is not at plenary level that the influence will be possible anymore. Once the bill makes it to plenary, basically that's it. So it needs to happen before, and therefore the biggest interest of citizens or civil society is usually at committee level, let's be honest, because that is where something can happen, where there can be some kind of influence. So my personal opinion on this, and again, without wanting to impose anything, is that it is that having committee meetings open to the public is very useful. Whatever this openness means. You can have it open through broadcasting, but it's not as interesting. Yeah. Why? Because people only get the information, right? Think about this public spectrum that I talked about before, which is this, the first level is about informing. So when you streamline something on Facebook, all people have is look at it, but they can't really do anything. I mean, they can't participate, they can't input into whatever is being said or discussed. If you allow people to actually participate, it can also be online, right? It goes broader than broadcasting. It's, you know, maybe a session where you can do broadcasting and then invite people online to actually say something or participate, or they can introduce some kind of a written statement or something before that, you know, the committee looks at. For example, you have those options as well. So there's lots of different ways, but generally I would say that it is important for people to, and CSOs to be able to access committee meetings. The other thing which you can do is, you know, have, which are important actually to do if you want to do that, is to have an agenda online of what the committee is going to discuss. Because, you know, if it's not something that people are interested in, then it's better people don't show up to something. So it's important to do that. And then again, minutes of meetings, of committee meetings, I'm very torn on this one. I think they're very useful if they are published in a way that that people, that basically is standardized. Because from one committee to another, what you often have is reports that are completely different. And then it can really create a lot of frustrations, because some committees are then very, very detailed about what they're reporting, and others, you will just see the agenda item in one sentence. And that's not useful at all, right? So I think getting to a level where you standardize some of these reports and the minimum of what people can expect when they see a report of a committee meeting, that's useful. And usually not in PDF format, because when you have PDF formats, you have to go through every single one of them, right? You can't actually find anything. And it will take hours for civil society. If they have one agenda item they're interested in, it will take them hours to go through all the PDFs. So I would say, you know, as much as possible, if the idea is to make it transparent, then think from the first moment to open data standards, because that will really facilitate the work when they're looking for something specific. And it's the same with the broadcasting, right? The problem of broadcasting is if you want to go back to something that was discussed in a committee, you know, a year and a half ago, you have to go through all of the different sort of broadcasts to find that specific information. So I think it's always about facilitating the work of the external so that they can find the information that they need fairly simply. And again, you know, it's a cumbersome process. And I'm not saying, you know, you need to do everything from today to tomorrow, but I think what I'm saying is it is a path to go to something like that. And you know, and I think that's kind of the objective, right? And when I think about generally, that's why I like this work so much, is because when I think about openness and participation, for me, the sky is the limit. You start with this step, and then you take this one and this one and this one, and you can develop more and more and more. And there's no limit to what you can do. But obviously, you need to take the first step and the second step. And I think the Open Government Partnership is useful in that it helps you to identify what the first step should be, and then what the second step should be, and the third step, and how you can improve time after time. Yes, I hope that was useful. Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Yeah, it's very useful. I think you can help us a lot. We actually filed a bill in the parliament about OGP, and that's why I'm very interested in this masterclass. There's a room for improvement on the bill, so I guess I can get many things here. So thank you very much for those inputs.
Thank you very much.
Mamulya,
Yes.
Mamulya, yeah. This is on the question raised by Sister MP Baintan on trust fund. On trust fund, yeah. In the Bangsamoro, we have the Bangsamoro Trust Fund. And the fund manager is World Bank. And the specific purpose of this is on the normalization, normalization component of the peace process. So the Bangsamoro Trust Fund, with the World Bank as the fund manager, is for that aspect, normalization of the peace process. And this is more of an executive work. The Bangsamoro Trust Fund is part of the executive function in making normalization be successful. So we have the support from international funding institutions like the World Bank, like I think UK and AusAid and so on. My question is, do you have an experience of a parliament having a trust fund, and for what purpose?
No, I haven't seen a parliament having a trust fund. What I have seen is organizations that support the parliament that have a trust fund. So, like, let's say, WFT, for example, would put together a trust fund of different donors and then help to implement some of these reforms. That I've seen quite a bit, actually. And the reason for that, for entrusting the money to the World Bank or, to another actor, is that they actually have the right mechanism in place to administer the money in terms of, the reporting and everything that is needed for that money to be spent according to whatever they set as criteria, because every donor has their specific criteria. So you'll have the UK have one criteria, then you go with the Australians, they have another criteria, and then everybody has their different criteria of how they want the money to be spent. So that's why usually it actually goes through these trust funds that are then administered by, as you mentioned, the World Bank on that specific. On the OGP, it is actually the World Bank itself as well that administers that specific OGP funding. So they are the trust funds for that. But again, the OGP trust fund is not something specific for any country, right? It is support that is provided through all the countries, all the 78 countries, plus all the regions around the world. So, so I don't necessarily find the trust fund of the Open Government Partnership necessarily very useful, because there's so many different ones that are interested in this. I think it's much more useful to approach maybe some bilateral donors that are active in the Bangsamoro to get some funding that way.
Thank you, Ma'am Julia, for the clarification again.
Thank you. Yeah, so I know that some of you had to leave already. The only thing I wanted to say is, so within my presentation, there's still, if I share the screen again, there's just one more thing, basically. It is this list of useful resources. It's all kind of different resources. And I will share the presentation with you, because I understand that there were 2 slides that you did not see. So Mahi, do you have my presentation? Maybe you can share it immediately after this, this masterclass with the participants. That would be great. Thank you so much. And so finally, as I say, I explained a little bit sort of what I think the next steps are. I think, great if you guys are already working on a specific bill regarding OGP. I think, again, it's great to try to identify some kind of ideas for what the commitments could look like. Maybe do a SWOT analysis. That is something some have done that could be useful. initiate some kind of discussion with the government. Is the government actually interested to join OGP local and then work together with civil society to draft some kind of ideas and then apply to OGP local, probably when the next call comes. So that would be my, what I would recommend as next steps. Yeah, so I just want to open up the floor again if there's still some questions or anything I can help to clarify. No, nothing specific. All right. So what I then wanted to still say is thank you very much for participating very actively in today's session. Please don't hesitate if there's any questions or anything you would still like to clarify. You can just ask Mahid and he will get in touch with me. And yeah, Mahid, I wanted to maybe give the floor to you. Thank you. Oh, you're still on mute.
Yeah, thank you very much, honorable MPs, for joining this afternoon for the discussion on open governance, open government partnerships. And yeah, we will share with you the materials for this afternoon presentations. And yeah, we will also invite you with other activities and other capacity building activities that we plan for this month. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening. Thank you very much, honorables.
Thank you, Wahid. Thank you, Ma'am Julia, for the interesting lecture today.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Brother Mahid.
Thank you, sir.